All right, for Pittsburgh Sports Live, this is John Krysinsky. I have the soccer guys with me from Pittsburgh Soccer Now. A couple of guys to start off here, Matt Popchcock and Mark Goodman, soccer rabbi. Gentlemen, welcome to our forum. I think we're going to try to do this at least on a weekly basis. Pittsburgh soccer scene, there's so much going on right now, and we're going to get right to it. This weekend, we saw the Pitt Panthers men's soccer team get off. The weekend got off on a good foot as they won a thrilling overtime match against Syracuse. But then yesterday, Saturday, the Pittsburgh Riverhounds just again another second half lead and another loss. Well, we'll talk about that a little bit, and then of course Pitt women's soccer. So Matt and Mark, you were at the women's game. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Matt, I know you like to share your reactions post match after the Riverhounds matches. What were your thoughts after watching them blow a 2-1 lead after two Canardo Forbes goals? It seemed like they were in control, and then it just all got away late again.
Well, I guess my thoughts are, John, that I'm still trying to collect my thoughts. I mean, I spent, I'm not going to lie, I spent a good half hour or hour on the couch after that match, just kind of sitting there in one of those what the heck just happened kind of states of mind. That's where I was at with it, more or less. I think the issue right now is I just don't think the back line is that good. And I think, and saying that gives me no pleasure, because the thing that is supposed to be allegedly the identity of this team under this particular coach and leadership group is the thing that keeps letting them down. In the last couple of weeks, it's boy, has it picked a doozy of a time to do that. Of course, last week, Alex Dixon was able to kind of bail them out with a goal at the end, and it was one of the goals of the year, quite honestly. But yeah, last night, I mean, just a red flag right in the beginning. After Forbes gets his first goal, and then literally right off the ensuing kick, Miami equalizes, and it just can't happen. I mean, and I'm not taking anything away from Miami, but I mean, it's the kind of thing that it just, at any level of soccer, I don't think that it can't happen. It cannot happen right after a goal in a big spot like that. Before or after a goal. After a goal, I should say. It's like, to use a hockey analogy, that first shift right after a goal in a hockey game is always a big shift, especially if you get caught napping. They got caught napping, and it felt like, it felt like a little bit of a different match after obviously the very promising start. There's a month left in the season. I think it largely remains to be seen if there's enough time for this group, particularly that back four, to figure things out. But I don't know if you want to call it the panic button, but it's definitely time to start mashing a button of some kind, because these are important games, important leads that are being surrendered. They haven't beaten a team that's currently in a playoff position since 4th of July weekend. Those things are problems for a team that is trying to get over certain very clearly defined humps, and who knows how much more time they have under this regime to do it.
Mark, I'm curious to your thoughts on this back line. There's been a lot of it feels like there's depth, but the depth they haven't really been able to figure out the combination of players. It seems like they're sending out a different back four or back three, or playing five in the back, and there's a lot of change. There's a lot of Bob Lilly asks a lot from his players in terms of being prepared to play, in one tactical formation, and then the next game, or even within the same game, to change things up so rapidly and quickly and adjust on the fly. And Mark, what are your thoughts on the fact that they haven't really had that? We know the talent level isn't, it's not like we're going to see Joe Greenspan and Hugh Roberts and Toby Adewale back there, but these are professionals. They just don't seem like they're late in games, especially, but there's been different moments where they've been exposed. in so many different ways this year, whether it's on set pieces, whether it's been on long balls. It's just a lot of variety of ways that they've been exposed. Mark, what are your thoughts?
That's well said. I mean, I think I've always thought that the important thing in a back line is the roles that the individual players play. Mikael Williams was clearly brought in as kind of the ball playing center back, the guy with experience, but he's older. He used to be a pacey fullback, and now he's not able to kind of break at speed and keep up with guys like Christian Francois, who really burned us last night pretty good. Then there's Shane Weed, who has been, I think, okay, but not exceptional. And he's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. He defends in good spaces, but he's not super fast. He's not great at aerials, but he's solid. And then you got Preston Kilwine, who I think has been pretty decent. I think he's been, for me, one of the more reliable of the three, but not exceptional. And then I'll say one last thing, which is when I was in Colorado, I talked to the assistant general manager who used to be kind of a tactics and stats and numbers guy for Arsenal Football Club in England. And we talked about, some of the problems that the Rapids were having at the time about the back line. And one of the things he said was, both statistically talking to the Arsenal coaches and looking at the way the game develops, if you're having problems with a guy closing out or tackling as the last defender on the back line, the problems didn't start with the back line. It's the problem starts, a step before that. So for me, one of the challenges I've noticed with the Riverhounds is they haven't had, Kenny Forbes sits deep and he's a regista. He wants to ping those long balls, or he wants to kind of dribble at guys. They haven't had a deep sitting shield to the back line. Robbie Mertz was a guy who could go both ways and could kind of terrorize guys in both directions. They've kind of plugged Danny Griffin into that spot a little bit, but he hasn't been that reliable. In the last couple of games, I didn't see what they did with him in Miami, but Todd Wharton has been moving higher up the field. They've been kind of playing him as a midfielder or an attacking midfielder, instead of a kind of a defensive shield and a defensive mid. And that's a little bit Bob being Bob this year, which is he's trying to be a little bit more attacking and fluid. Last week when I interviewed him, he talked about how he was, they got a draw, but it should have been a win. And they really should have kind of defended. He was really happy with the attack. He was really happy with the way they played. And actually, I think they got a loss. Now I'm going back and I'm like, I think they lost that game.
You were at the tie.
So I was in a draw. That's right.
Right.
I never remember anything a week later.
It's
time to hear. No, for me, they're not shielding the back line very well, and they're being a little bit more aggressive in offense, and that's not necessarily getting results.
I think you're right on, but and you mentioned Canardo Forbes, and I think there was a point during the season where suddenly he was sometimes sitting the highest player. I mean, the last game I was at, and then there was a couple other games, he's been sitting very, very high in the formation, sometimes just below the front line of attackers. He's been more creative. He's been more involved. He scored 2 goals last night. He's been getting forward. He's almost, and Matt, I think you might remember this. He's almost in that Kevin Kerr, when Kevin was into the later years of his career, where he would just kind of pick his spots and he was played very high. Even like it worked kind of well with Corey Hartzog at times. It worked kind of well when that last year in 2018, where he was able to use his ability to, see the field well, and kind of maybe that last pass or when he had the opportunities to shoot. Interesting, Canardo didn't score, I think, for the first 20 games this season. So now all of a sudden he's more involved in the offense. And so, that leaves the onus on Danny Griffin. It leaves maybe Wharton, but Wharton's been pushing up higher as well. It's like, it feels like Danny Griffin's on an island sometimes back there and trying to like be that two-way player. He's been that durable player. But the other thing with Danny Griffin is, I mean, he's played more minutes than he's ever played in any time, and sometimes we see that with young players. They get into this long season for the first time. Last year was a shortened season, and I'm just wondering, I think there's some things there, but Bob, I asked Bob that question last week too about Danny Griffin and his durability, and he's just really believes in Danny Griffin in that spot and in that role. So, but yeah, Matt, your thoughts on this team's can they kind of find those solutions?
Well, if I am looking for some light at the end of the tunnel from last night, I am looking at the fact, like you said, that Canardo Forbes, who's only one of the greatest playmakers and setup men in the modern history of the league, is now starting to put the ball in the back of the net a little bit more. I mean, it's good. It's nice to see him get more involved in the offense. And, you got to figure with some of the issues that you guys have talked about, in his role as captain, he's doing that much more yeoman's work, trying to play that much more damage control, which you'd think would take an edge off his offensive game, and clearly that hasn't been the case. With that being said, when he's the one that's doing all the goal scoring, no disrespect to King Kenny, and a guy like Russell Cicerone, who's having a phenomenal year. He's second in the Golden Boot race. And when your number one guy all of a sudden can't hit the broadside of a barn, one wonders. One wonders a little bit. And I mean, score one for Captain Obvious. Scoring at that level is hard. Scoring at that level tends to be kind of random. I think it comes and goes in spurts for a lot of guys. I think if you're Bob, you just got to hope that another spurt is around the corner, and that Russell hasn't quite finished shooting his shot to this point yet, because they need him. They need his offensive prowess and leadership, and they need more guys up front sharing the sugar and getting on the score sheet.
Mark, do you think the fact that they are playing so open-ended games, like I feel like if it's especially Miami, that's a team that Bob said that when things open up, it can get dangerous against them, and they just can't clamp things down. I mean, it's just these wide open type of games, right? I mean, is it if they kind of go back to Bob Lilly 1-0 specials, maybe that's what I was kind of thinking, they're getting into the stretch where they play Miami, Tampa, Miami. Aren't they going to go back to the basics? I mean, that's what you would think, but
I don't think so. I mean, he was really excited. Bob was really excited when I spoke to him last week about Albert Dequa coming back and that front three that they have that can really attack, with Cicerone and Dequa and, maybe Velarde on the other wing, or maybe pushing up their wings, Rivera and Dover on the other side. That's what he's excited about this year. I don't even know if they have the horses to kind of sit deep and defend hard. We haven't seen it anyways. I mean, I think you could do a back four with Mikael Williams on one side and put a defensive midfielder there and really be a little bit tighter. But I don't think they're going to do it. I think it's going to be really hard to beat Tampa Bay. I just don't think that's a really good team this year. There've been a lot of MLS coaching vacancies in the last couple weeks. Right now, Cincinnati has an opening. Chicago has an opening. Raphael Wicke got fired the day before yesterday. Mm-hmm. I think Neil Collins has an outside shot at one of those jobs, considering what he's done down in Tampa Bay with, honestly, what they had 3 years ago wasn't particularly different than what they have now. That team's really good. Miami at home for the Riverhounds will be a lot better, regardless of how they come out. So I don't think Bob's going to clamp down. I might agree with you, though, that it might be the prudent move at this juncture.
Hear those words again. I don't think Bob Lilly will clamp down. I gotta hear that.
I know, right?
No, I'm glad you touched on that, because here's the rub. Are they playing a more wide open style because Bob wants to, or are they playing a more wide open style because he's realized on the fly that he has to, that, like we've been talking about, he doesn't have the horses this year to win his way, as it were. So he's trying to win a different way. And lately, it's not going quite as smoothly as any of us would like.
But I want to counter that. I want to say, well, when they play Tampa and when they play Charlotte, those games I think will take on a different feel. And based on looking at Tampa is just defensively is just so tough, and they're not going to give an inch. So I'm and maybe are the Hounds a better team when they're more of a kind of a sit back, absorb, and then counter? That's the question I have for both of you.
I don't. Let me put it this way. I don't think they have to completely go back to the other end of the spectrum, back to traditional lily ball, as it's been called, and go back to trying to eke out those 1-0 wins and trying to just spend 90 minutes creating the biggest mess possible in the middle of the field for the other teams. You can still, lean on offense. I mean, my goodness, if you have the kind of goal scoring talent that they do have this year, you should use it. It would be nonsensical not to try to lean on those guys. So you don't have to go back all the way, I don't think, to that style. You just have to prove that you know how to put teams away.
Yeah.
Because this team just hasn't been doing that to the extent that they had been doing. And in that respect, this 2021 group has been very un-Bob-like, if you will.
Mark?
Tampa Bay's been murdering teams. That's all what I'm looking at right now is looking at what
this is also fair.
What they've done in their last couple games. Tampa Bay is currently in their. I looked at their immediate results. They've won their. At first, I was like, oh, they've won their last 5 games. I wonder what they've been up to since then. And then I went back and I was like, oh no, they've won their last 8 games. And they haven't lost a game in 11. The last time they lost was July 31st against Charlotte. And they've shut out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of their opponents of the last 11 games.
Well, they've
That's
had
insane.
a very impressive.
It is insane.
Well, and I think so for me with the Riverhounds, it's mostly about I skipped your question sort of, which is like, are they better playing open-ended or defensive? Yeah. Is possession, is counterattacking football? What should their mode be? For me, the big question as a guy who's been watching the Riverhounds closely for 4 seasons is can they get over the hump, right? The Bob Lilly Riverhounds have been a team that can prove that they can be a 500 or above team in the season. Can they win a first round playoff game? Can they win a second round playoff game? Can they get to an Eastern Conference final? Can they get to the promised land and be in the USL championship game? And the answer is, it will really find out this Sunday when we find out whether they can match up and cause real problems with Tampa Bay. Because honestly, Tampa Bay have been the class of the league, of this division, of this conference. And if the Riverhounds can't hang with them, then all we're really talking about, guys, is like, well, it'll be fun to get into the playoffs again, and then it'll be a long winter.
Well, again, another counterpoint, and I hear you. I do think Tampa's in better form now than they were at the beginning of the year when they were in really good form, and then they kind of tailed off. And at the beginning of that tail off, the Riverhounds went down there and kind of avenged that first loss to Tampa and won at Tampa. Looked very well, looked very good. They were playing on the front foot. I think they were possession heavy that night. I know Tampa was a little banged up and they were missing Dos Santos for sure. I think maybe a couple other players. So but I do think that Tampa is in playing better now and they're in better form. But again, we should never, ever put anything past Bob Lilly. I think we all know that as well. So it's intriguing. I think it's going to be a very intriguing finish. I think they are fighting for second place. They're fighting for their lives in terms of, can we get a home playoff game? Because from there, hey, anything's possible. I also think that I would say that up until last night, that they have been pretty frisky on the road, like a pretty good road team. And then last night happened. I mean, I dismissed Loudoun United. I dismissed the midweek game. If you take that one out, really every other road game, it's been, there's 1-0 games to, and the Loudon game, they gave up 2 ridiculous goals from outside the box. I mean, I'm not making excuses, but I just think that and at the end of the day, I think Bob Lilly will have his team prepared. He has the decent group of players. I think it's just finding that if that back line can get some cohesion over the next 4 games, if they can get that cohesion, going back and forth about like what's in front of the back line and what's, that's causing problems. Where maybe what they really truly miss is the Mo Dabo type player. There's just that guy that's just going to do the real dirty work. That's right. And get his nose dirty. And, Mark's pointing to his nose. Are you referring to something else?
No, I was saying you got it on the nose. That was that.
I mean,
we're playing charades now.
That's good. We got to open it up to more charades then in future episodes.
Well, I wish I could take credit for the analogy that I'm about to use, but when you're forced to shuffle the deck year after year over and over again, to your point, you're not going to turn up aces every single time. And I think Bob is finding that out the hard way. I think we, as media, spectators, fans, et cetera, I think we're seeing that as well. I think and especially as of late, that's being demonstrated. So I think the big challenge isn't just getting this righting the ship right now, but I think a big key to it in the short haul and the long haul is just if you're going to lean on these guys, if you're Bob, you see more potential in some of these guys than maybe we do. You got to keep them together. There's got to be organizational stability off the field doesn't seem to really mean all that much without organizational stability on it. And I think that's kind of a problem that they're running into. Separately, I would throw out there, we had talked when we did our preseason predictions about, who was going to be in and out in this division in this conference. And I had kind of said, well, I figure it'll be Tampa and Pittsburgh kind of slugging it out for the top 2 spots. And for, on the whole, that's the way it's played out. And now Miami is kind of shoehorned their way into that conversation. I'm at the point personally where I look at this division and I look at the last couple of matches in particular, and I say, you know what? Give Tampa Bay the division. Seriously, give them the division. Let them have to play Charlotte again. Let them have to kill the Giant Killers. The only team in the league that has beaten both Pittsburgh twice and Tampa Bay twice, the Charlotte Independents. Let them have to face that boogeyman. Let Pittsburgh take the path of least resistance. And if that path is in fact playing a bunch of road games to try and get to the promised land, so it goes.
Well, Pittsburgh South or Louisville and those type of teams, the Pittsburgh South, I am referring to Birmingham, of course. But it was Pittsburgh of the South 100 years ago, and it's Pittsburgh of the South.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair.
If you know your history of the industrial economics of this country. But anyway, the fact is, this is a team that I think could be more dangerous with playing kind of that underdog role, but we'll see. I don't know. Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I think Jordan. I think Matt's right. I think trying to get the Riverhounds away from Charlotte is a good idea. But you don't want to drop too many of these games because you put yourself in a position where you're going to be the road team, and I would not like that, at least as a guy who likes watching soccer games, because when I first moved here, the Hounds were doing great, and they had a first round match, and it wasn't convenient, and I couldn't make it. And so I was like, oh, I'm sure they'll win their first round match against Bethlehem Steel, and then I'll see him in the next game. And that didn't happen because we all remember what happened that night in 2018. And so, taking for granted the fact that, you're going to get past that first round is not a thing that we should do. One of the things that was nice when talking to Bob last week was they are very much, and I know this is cliche for managers and for players, but they're very much taking it one game at a time. They definitely were not willing to think about the broader sweep of the close of the season. I asked a question about resting guys and rotating as we went through the end of the season. His quick answer was, we have one game a week from here on out. We don't have, double game weeks anymore. I will rest some guys, but I want my guys to stay sharp for the playoffs. So I think a lot of the starters are going to be there. So I don't think that we have to worry so much about that. But they really were focused on the idea of we're taking it one game at a time.
Well, and I think they're still going to do that. I think it's a one game at a time. I think they're going to, they're professionals. They're going to have a short memory, and they've got a big match against Tampa coming up this week. So I do think there's a level of understanding to Matt's point. This team maybe just still needs to, as a group, collectively learn how to finish and win games once they have the lead. We're just finish these games, play a 90-minute game. And so I think that's what it comes down to. So, all right, we don't have I'd like to try to move to a couple other topics real quick before we close this thing out. We were talking a lot about the Riverhounds. Pitt soccer, Mark, you were at the women's game last night. I've been to a bunch of the men's games and really followed the men's team closely the past couple of years. And Mark, you were there last night. The atmosphere, it seems like it's routine now. You get a regular season match at Ambrose Urbanic Field, and we're talking about a packed facility where it's very rarely can you find a seat if you get there 10 minutes late. And it's just, we've got both programs are on the rise. Obviously, the men are, they're going to be in talk about to be a College Cup contender, I think, as long as Jay Vidovich is around. But the women's program, I think they're still slugging their way through it. It's a challenging, but I think they're challenging ranked ACC teams, and you saw that last night.
Yeah, so they put on a good show against Virginia Tech, who is the 19th ranked team in the country coming in, and they're kind of mid-table in the ACC. The ACC tournament this year is going to be really hard to get into. Last year, it took 8 teams out of the 14, and this year they're only taking 6. So it's a real tight squeeze to get in there. And that was one of Randy Waldrum, their head coach's goals at the beginning of the season, was to make the postseason. And he knew that if they won a lot of non-conference games, they had a shot at getting into the NCAA tournament. His real goal was to win enough games in the ACC to be there at the end. It's not looking real good right now. 4 games through, they're 1-3 in the ACC. They've got 6 games to go in the ACC. They've got some big teams ahead of them. Their next 2 matches are against North Carolina this Thursday at Ambrose Urbanic here in Oakland, Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh to be exact, on top of the hill. And then the week after that, they have a match against Duke in Durham, North Carolina. And UNC is ranked 4th and Duke is ranked 3rd in the country. So those are good teams. I think there were some tactical mistakes, and I don't want to pin that on Randy because if he watches this, he's going to yell at me. But I don't think I'm wrong entirely. What Virginia Tech did was in the first half, they kind of sat at the beginning of the final third, and they knew, and it was really interesting. It was a really fun. If you like soccer tactics, like I do, it was a fun kind of like display of coaching acumen. When Virginia Tech got the ball and started from the back with the goalkeeper, they just kicked it long. They didn't want to play it out of the back. They did not want to risk facing the press. When Pitt had the ball, Pitt, in the whole time that I've watched Randy Waldrum, plays it out of the back, right? It goes to the center back plays with the fullback wants to move it up to the midfielders, yada, yada, yada. They want to play through and they want to possess, and they don't want an easy turnover. They don't want to go aerial, which also has to do with the fact that their defensive midfielder is 5 feet tall. So she's listed at 5'2", but I've stood next to Chloe Minas. I don't think she's 5'2".
Yeah.
So she'd have to stand up real tight to put on taller shoes. So what that means is they play out of the back. And what happened was Virginia Tech for the whole first half played right at that line. They set their line of confrontation at the end of the first third. And as soon as that ball went out to the fullbacks, they just cut it off. They just kind of jumped the passing lanes, pressed the ball, and Pitt looked rattled, and they turned over the ball, which if you'd watched any of their games earlier in the season against non-conference opponents, TCU, they played St. Francis and just absolutely
Oklahoma
drilled them.
State, I think.
Yeah, they played a whole bunch of teams and just they made mincemeat of them. And they looked really rattled and they really struggled. They bounced back in the second half, but Virginia Tech had more physical size, and they were a little bit more like physical on the ball and hard to dispossess. And, there were times in the first half where I thought Pitt is lucky to get out of this half 1-0. In the second half, it could have gone either way, but I think it was a lesson. I think Virginia Tech is probably better than a 19th ranked team. Duke and North Carolina are going to be.
Don't get me and Matt started about college soccer rankings.
Yeah.
We've been going back
to
and
say
forth
nothing
about
of the rest of college sports rankings.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
that's true.
I don't understand a lot of how the world works anymore, but I understand that less than I understand anything else.
Well, the
Quote of the year right there.
The challenge with the ACC is that realistically, you could rank like the top 12 teams in the ACC as the top 20 teams in the country in both the men's and the women's side. They're just that good.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I mean, I think if I do believe this team has the talent and the kind of technical ability to win one of these games, to nick one of these games. They've proven in the last couple of years that they can beat good teams. They can beat big teams. The men's team has too, right? They'll pull a shocker at least once a season over a top 3 opponent. And so,
now they're the team.
The one last thing I'll say, John, is that they've been missing Amanda West for a whole month, and she, was in the Golden Boot race last year, and she's an exceptional striker. They just haven't, replaced her in the lineup effectively, even though they have a lot of talented forwards. If she gets healthy and she comes back, that will make a big difference.
Well, we here in Pittsburgh know Sarah Shapansky. We know Ellie Caulfield, obviously more of a midfielder, and Harrigan as well. There's players that shined here locally, and just it tells you how that level of play in the ACC is. And what's interesting is that it's still Amanda's West is technically it's a junior, so third year. It's still a relatively young team, and I think they're gonna blossom. And you talk about the physical matchups, and I think sometimes that comes with that physical maturity. I mean, I think that being more battle hardened, that sort of thing. But you touched on a point, and it's a good transition to Pitt men, and that is, the Pitt men not having 6 spots in the ACC tournament. At least Pitt men, I think they got into an 8-team or a 12-team tournament and were able to get that first playoff win. It was on the road. It was away a few years back when they were still kind of meddling, when they weren't quite in where they are now. And I think that really gave so much confidence to the program. I think that was the 2007, 18 or 17 or 18 team, I think, where they were just sort of meddling. They were still dealing with, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams in front of them in the ACC that were, ranked ahead of them. They were just much better, but they got that confidence boosting win. It helped with recruiting. It's something that, and Randy has talked about that. He's talked about that. We need those signature wins because that's going to get the recruits in. And one thing he does really well is he's a terrific recruiter, but he can only recruit if from this point forward, the top level players, if he starts to win against those big time opponents. So they need, I think, a win against Duke or North Carolina coming up, I think will go a long way.
Yeah, I'll just add that the center backs were really shaky this game. A lot of kind of sloppy turnovers and a few just missed plays, and it wasn't great, and it wasn't as it wasn't. How do I want to say this? They weren't who I've seen them be in the past. They just looked like a team that weren't having their best day. Some of that has to do with these are young players who are, through a long season. And I think one of the things we forget about college soccer is what a grind it is. They are playing 2 games a week, every single week, and they're going to classes. And they're doing all the COVID protocols. and they're in their second or third year of all of these COVID protocols, so it's a really big challenge for a lot of these student athletes. More power to them. They're, if they can get right, mentally going into this next week, though, it'll go a long way.
Yeah, and that I appreciate you bringing that up. I think it's been brought up by me quite a bit over the past year, and especially during the COVID year, this unique season where we saw Pitt men and women both play in the fall, where a lot of schools didn't play in the fall. But Jay Vidovich is a huge proponent, and he has such influence across the board, across the landscape of American college soccer. And I know he's not alone, but his influence. He's definitely trying to bring this, what they're calling 21st century model, to the college ranks, and it has to get approved by the NCAA. And basically that would be what we saw last year: a fall and a spring season, games once a week, give the kids an opportunity to go to class, and kind of be student athletes without too much of a grind of a schedule. And to be honest with you, even though we were dealing with COVID last year, I thought that we saw development of players from the Pitt men's team. We saw Luke Peperak and Luke Mort, two local guys, Matt, you know the local soccer scene a little bit. I mean, we saw guys like that. We're seeing Michael Sullivan, who you covered, with Deer Lake Soccer. He's getting in at the end of some of these games, which is a good sign. But, with a longer season, Michael Sullivan by the end of the season might be an impactful player coming off the bench or even getting some spot starts, right, Matt?
Yeah, the whole fall spring thing, especially the spring part from a Pitt standpoint on the men's side, was obviously very fun to watch. And when Sullivan did commit to Pitt, and when that whole thing went down, I just about did a double take because he was on that Deer Lakes WPIAL championship team and the state runner-up team. A pleasure to watch and a pleasure to speak to, for that matter. Very friendly, very good at dealing with media. And Deer Lakes had an awful lot of media attention for a small school that hadn't won a lot of championships in any sport, really. There isn't much of an athletic history, which made it all the more fun of a story to cover. But yeah, it is great to see Pitt. You got to be able to win the recruiting battles in your own backyard, get some local players in, whatever the talent level might be. And I could see Sullivan in the foreseeable future being an impact player for the men's team. It certainly seems to have caught on the local recruiting, at least on the women's side, with Shapansky and Caulfield from a literal national championship high school team in Mars, Pennsylvania, being brought into play. It's still kind of mind blowing to me when I think about that they have that. That they have someone who has that distinction playing for Pitt soccer. But yeah, I think and I was sort of eyeballing Mark's coverage last night as I was keeping 1 3/4 eyes on the Riverhounds. I was keeping another fraction of an eye on what the Pitt women were doing, and it seems like they too. The Pitt women, kind of like the Hounds, are still trying to figure out how to be great for a full match. It seems like, and I've seen some of those early season matches he talked about. I saw the Oklahoma State match where they stole a win from those guys in extra time. The great goal by Amanda West in the extra session. On their best day, they are a great team, and they can play with the Dukes and the Syracuses and the North Carolinas and some of these other ACC outfits. So I do hope the local kids have something to say about the growth of the program going forward. And I mean, just on a personal note, I'm rooting for Randy Waldrum. I think he's a terrific face of that program. I admire what he's done with the women's program. He presents himself very well and very personably. He appreciates the attention that the program is getting even now. And I mean, he literally was starting from scratch, much like Jay Vidovich was when he got here. And look where both programs are, to this point in time. The men are what they are, and the women are this close, it feels like, to figuring it out. So, I do want to see them thrive, and I definitely want to see the local players continue to be a part of that, just because I think they've got some good leadership there at that program.
One last thought off of that, Matt,
Absolutely.
was just that in the last game, Ellie Caulfield had a pretty good game. She was just really useful. Great, her field vision as a player who kind of is right in the middle of everything, receives and unloads, checks her shoulder, knows what's going on, like traffic topping everything. She had a pretty good game against a tough Virginia Tech team that kind of sealed her off. Sarah Shapansky had a really hard time finding the game last night. So interesting to see how she rebounds from that experience, of whether she gets into a battle against North Carolina and Duke and says to herself, like, I was kind of invisible the last game. It's time to, shut up and take charge and do the thing. So one other thing, Landy Mertz had a really nice game last night in kind of limited use. She had a fantastic spin move nutmeg on an opponent, which
I knew you were going to bring that up.
was wonderful, and I'm sure is greatly appreciated for us local Upper St. Clair fans.
Well, I will say this. I think that both Randy Waldrum and Jay Vidovich have brought a certain flair, teams that are fun to watch. I mean, there's a reason why that place is packed. Winning obviously is part of it, but they're fun to watch. And, the thing about the men, I think this year, Jay Vidovich wants to play the toughest schedule, and having to go to Akron, going to West Virginia, losing those matches. But I think there's something there to be gained, and they've come out of it now. I think they've come out of it. But again, Syracuse, not really a ranked team, but any team in the ACC is a tough matchup. Gave them everything they could Friday night. So I think this is a team that, every season's new. There's going to, even though you're bringing back 10 of 11 starters, you probably have 20 players back from last year's team. I think this team still needed to find itself a little bit early in the season. And not only that, they are now the team with the target on its back. And I think that's a new role, a very unfamiliar role for Pitt soccer, but I'm familiar for Jay Vidovich. But that's it. That, to me, going forward, at least for the rest of this regular season, Pitt men's soccer team with the target on its back. And can they carry that? Can they get to another College Cup? And I think that's a good way to finish up this edition of our show. Did they have they right the ship now after those couple of those tough road losses? And are they kind of back with some different faces contributing?
Well, I'll answer a question with a question. Can they beat a high press? I mean, all kidding aside, can they do that? Because early in the season, you and I had kind of talked about this. Teams that were playing a high press against them were having success against them, especially in some of those road matches against some of those tougher teams that they struggled with. Then they turn around and put a foot down and just smack North Carolina.
Yeah.
I mean, North Carolina and it's not like they just squeaked by. They ran the flipping North Carolina Tar Heels out of the building.
That's right.
I mean, what a resounding match that was. So they showed, like the women have shown, that on their best day, they are that College Cup level team. They are, to use the Dennis Green quote, they are who we think they are, or who we thought they were coming into the 2021 season. And I think that, if the human capacity for change and to adapt to teams that are playing that high press style, and to adapt to teams that in theory are going to be playing their very best game against you every single match, night in and night out, because you're Pitt and you're the big kahuna now in your conference. If they can, brace themselves for that physically and mentally, then yes, I mean, they can be a College Cup team. To some that might sound outlandish, but a couple years ago, it was outlandish to think that Pitt could be a College Cup team. Last year, they were a College Cup team, and in all reality, we're a Nats eyelash away from being a national championship team, or at the bare minimum, a national championship finalist. So yes, plenty of ifs, but yes, they can be that team. They are capable of being that team.
Yeah, and I think they are, and they're right there. And I think that this next rest of the regular season, I think it'll be their goal is to win the Coastal, and I think they're the type of team that I think will be now they're battle hardened, and they'll I like their chances to go. Really, I like their chances to go all the way. But you mentioned the press, and the one thing was that match, the win at Clemson. They kind of weathered an early storm, and they finally beat Clemson. I think that was another. It seems like they have these little milestones that they accomplish along the way. They hadn't beaten Clemson. They lost twice last year in big, championship type games, the conference championship, and then the at-large bid at stake game in the spring. Both times on the road away from home down in the Carolinas, and Clemson just were a little too good for them through a 90-minute period. I thought there were stretches in both of those matches previously against Clemson where they were the better team for when where they kind of turned it on a little bit there in the second half. But that's the thing. They bring their A game. I think they're capable of beating and going very, very far. So all right, any parting thoughts, Mark? Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
No, I didn't mean, hopefully I didn't step on Mark's toes there, but I was just going to say the great point about Clemson, because that was, I mean, you talk about clearly defined humps that teams need to get over. That's a clearly defined hump for Pitt. It just seemed like they could not, for the life of them, figure out the Clemson Tigers. And I think that finally being able to do that, and on the road at Riggs Field to boot, was massive for them. And maybe we'll look back on that as a crossroads for the season. I hope we do anyway. We'll see.
All right, gentlemen. So what are we looking forward to this coming week? Mark, any thoughts on some of the games and any of the things coming up that you're looking forward to the most?
I mean, I just looked, and it's a ridiculous. This might be the best week to watch Pittsburgh soccer possible. Tuesday, the men's team has Cleveland State. Thursday, the women's team has North Carolina. Saturday, the men's team has, here in Pittsburgh, I think it's Duke. Then right. The Riverhounds play at 3:00 on Sunday, and I think that there's and then the
3 now, or is it 6? I thought it was 6.
I think it's 6.
Did they move it to 6? Is
they
that
moved
where
to
now?
6?
I believe so.
Then my app hasn't updated the time. So good thing, because I would have gotten to the stadium like 4 hours early.
Prime time.
Exceedingly drunk by kickoff. So that's a lot of really good games, and that's a lot of really good teams that local teams are playing. I don't know that we're going to have another week this good for a long time, for till next season. So
maybe in November.
Yeah,
maybe in November, right?
Yeah, hopefully playoff home games. Yeah,
we hope so.
We hope that when the women make the NCAA tournament, the men and the Riverhounds are still playing, right?
I hope so.
Knock on wood. But yeah, I'm with you. I think this is in terms of the level of teams that those programs are playing, and we haven't even talked about. I know Robert Morris is struggling, Matt, but Duquesne men's soccer team this year is after getting absolutely thrubbed by Pitt, they've really turned it up and kind of found their identity as a high-scoring A10 team. So remains to be seen. They beat your alma mater, Mark, GW.
My alma mater can't beat anybody these days. So I think GW's lost to lacrosse teams and U14s at this point. It's not going well for the Colonials. So
all right,
at least he's honest.
Matt, Popchcock, any final parting thoughts or things to look forward to this week? We obviously haven't had time to squeeze high school soccer in, but we're coming down the stretch now. It should be really an interesting last couple of weeks in the high school regular season.
Yeah, it's been a fun first month of the season. It was a really fun start to the second month of the season, going to Plum High School and getting to talk with Coach Raff, who I know is sort of a buddy of yours, and
my brother.
Yes, and massive win for the Plum Mustangs against their rivals in Eastern Suburbia, Franklin Regional. Big statement win for them at home. It's going to be a really fun stretch run. It's like you said, it's been interesting to see Duquesne suddenly get its act together on the pitch. And I do think Robert Morris, I will just throw it out there, is going to get there at some point. I think they're going to get there eventually on the men's side and the women's side under these two coaches. I'm a lot of people I know are admirers of John Kowalski and admirers of Bill Denniston, but it was way past time for a change. And I give Chris King, the athletic director, credit for pulling the trigger on those changes. And I think he's brought in a couple of good coaches. So hopefully the wins are going to come for them like they've come for the Dukes.
Well, and your perspective, having been, connected to Robert Morris, I think that's good to know that, I really think it was time for change too. But, a lot of people close to the program probably, these two well-respected people who've been around for a long time. So I think it's good to see the new coaches. And I think they're even from the spring when they both kind of thrown into baptism by fire to now, I think we've seen some improvement.
Yeah, we absolutely have. It's not necessarily going to show up in the results. That's just kind of where they're at right now. But I think you're definitely seeing both teams are in games more, for want of a better phrase. You're still seeing the men's side, of which Danny Yates from Deer Lakes is now a part on that coaching staff. He's an assistant there. The men's side is particularly young. I believe a 30-man at current roster is at 30 men thereabouts. 19 of them are freshmen or sophomores. So that's, pretty staggering. And these aren't just freshmen or sophomores that are getting thrown in garbage time. These guys are playing most, if not the full 90, close to it. So just one of those things where they have to grow up on the field and go through those growing pains. But I wouldn't be surprised if, especially toward the end of the season, you see some light bulbs start to go on, particularly on the women's side too. The women had a nice little modest unbeaten streak going at one point not very long ago, before the wheels sort of came off the wagon a little bit. But I don't think it'll be too much longer before you see that team figure out how to win. And figuring out how in the Horizon League it's hard. It's a harder league than the NEC, and that's made the learning curve for everybody involved with both programs steeper. But they are definitely, you're right, John. I think they are both showing signs of getting there.
All right. Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate both your time tonight. I think this is, we're going to be going hard probably for the next month or so. Pittsburgh Soccer Now, lots and lots of soccer here in Pittsburgh to keep up with. As Mark said, an exciting week on tap. And I look forward to doing this again, probably at the end of every weekend. We can get some guests. And we, real quick, shout out to Zach Weiss, who's been doing stellar coverage with the Duquesne program. Zach is the man. We'll get him on here in the coming episodes. Zach, really appreciate everything you're doing. I think we're looking forward to what should be another great week. So again, both of gentlemen, thanks for joining me tonight, and we'll look forward to doing this again.
Hail to Pitt.
Thank you, John.
All right, guys, have a good night.